Many seniors don't talk about depression or anxiety because they don't feel it, but because they believe they must endure it. Depression in older adults rarely announces itself loudly. It often arrives softly, disguised as fatigue, disinterest, or physical discomfort. From a biological perspective, depression involves changes in neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine chemicals that influence mood, motivation, and reward. With age, the regulation of these systems becomes less efficient, not because the brain is broken, but because it has adapted to decades of stress responses, hormonal changes, and metabolic shifts. Cortisol, the hormone released during stress, may remain elevated for longer periods in older adults, subtly altering brain regions involved in emotion, such as the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. Over time, this can reduce emotional resilience, making sadness feel heavier and recovery slower. Yet biology alone never tells the whole story. Depression in seniors often reflects a mismatch between the life they are living and the life their nervous system evolved to expect. Humans are social organisms. Our brains are wired for connection, purpose, and movement. When retirement removes daily structure, when mobility declines, when friends pass away, the brain interprets these changes as signals of danger or loss. Neural circuits associated with reward receive less stimulation, while circuits linked to vigilance and threats become more active. The result is not just sadness, but a persistent sense of emotional demeanor, feeling that the world has become quieter, smaller, less responsive. Anxiety follows a similar path, though it often expresses itself through restlessness rather than withdrawal. In the aging brain, the amygdala, which detects potential threats, may become more sensitive, while the prefrontal cortex, which helps evaluate and calm those signals, may respond more slowly. This imbalance can cause worries to linger. Concerns about health, finances, safety, or independence are not irrational. They are grounded in real changes. But anxiety amplifies these concerns, turning reasonable caution into constant alertness. The body remains in a state of low-grade stress, muscles tense, heart rate slightly elevated, breathing shallow. Over time, this physiological state feeds back into the mind, reinforcing anxious thoughts in a continuous loop. What makes depression and anxiety in seniors particularly complex is how closely they intertwine with physical health. Chronic pain, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and inflammation all influence brain chemistry. Inflammation, for example, releases molecules called cytokines that can cross into the brain and interfere with neurotransmitter function. From a scientific perspective, this means that emotional distress is not merely in the mind, it is distributed throughout the body. The immune system, the endocrine system, and the nervous system communicate constantly, shaping mood and perception. When one system is strained, the others respond. This interconnectedness helps explain why older adults often describe emotional distress through physical symptoms. Fatigue, aches, digestive discomfort, and sleep disturbances may be the body's language for psychological strain. That sleep itself becomes more fragile with age. The architecture of sleep changes, with less deep restorative sleep and more frequent awakenings, because sleep is essential for emotional regulation and memory processing. Disrupted sleep can intensify both depression and anxiety. The brain simply has less opportunity to reset. Yet within this complexity lies hope, grounded in the remarkable adaptability of the human brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and reorganize, does not vanish with age. It slows, but it remains present. New neural connections can still form, especially when stimulated by movement, learning, and social interaction. This means that coping is not about returning the brain to its younger state, but about supporting it in its current one. Small, consistent changes can have profound effects because they gently shift the balance of neural activity over time. One of the most powerful interventions is also one of the simplest meaningful human connection. From a scientific standpoint, social interaction stimulates the release of oxytocin, a hormone that reduces stress responses and promotes feelings of safety. It also activates reward pathways in the brain, counteracting the emotional flatness of depression. Conversation, shared laughter, even quiet companionship signal to the nervous system that it is not alone. Philosophically, this reminds us that mental health is not an individual achievement but a relational state. We regulate one another's nervous systems through presence and attention. Movement offers another pathway to healing. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain, enhances the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and supports neurotransmitter balance. For seniors, movement does not need to be intense to be effective. Gentle walking, stretching, or balance exercises engage sensory and motor circuits that reinforce the brain's connection to the body. This reconnection is crucial, as depression and anxiety often involve a sense of disembodiment, a feeling of being disconnected from one's physical self. Movement restores that dialogue, reminding the brain that the body is still capable, still responsive. When we think about aging, especially in relation to mental health, it is easy to fall into the belief that the brain is slowly breaking down. This belief is deeply rooted in fear rather than science. The truth is more nuanced and far more hopeful. The aging brain is not failing. It is adapting to a lifetime of experiences, stresses, learning, and survival. What we observe as change is not loss alone, but reorganization. From a biological perspective, the brain remains active throughout life. Neurons continue to communicate, form connections, and respond to the environment. While the speed of certain processes may slow, the depth of integration often increases. Older brains tend to rely more on distributed networks rather than rapid, localized responses. This is why seniors may take longer to process information but often show stronger emotional insight and reasoning shaped by experience. Slowness, in this context, is not dysfunction, it is a shift in strategy. Neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine do change with age. Their production, release, and reuptake become less efficient, and the brain becomes more sensitive to stress hormones like cortisol. These shifts can influence mood, motivation, and emotional regulation, increasing vulnerability to depression or anxiety. However, vulnerability is not the same as inevitability. These chemical changes reflect a nervous system that has adapted to decades of challenge and adaptation, not one that has lost its capacity for balance. One of the most misunderstood aspects of aging is the belief that emotional distress is a normal or unavoidable part of growing older. Science does not support this assumption. Depression and anxiety are not natural consequences of aging. They are responses to specific biological, psychological, and social pressures. When these pressures accumulate through illness, isolation, grief, or reduced autonomy, the brain's regulatory systems can become overwhelmed. The resulting emotional symptoms are signals, not failures. Crucially, the aging brain retains neuroplasticity, the ability to change and reorganize in response to experience. While plasticity may slow, it never disappears. New neural pathways can form in response to movement, learning, social engagement, and emotional support. This means that the senior brain is not fixed in decline, but responsive to care and stimulation. Even small, consistent changes can lead to meaningful improvements in emotional well-being. Reframing aging as adaptation rather than deterioration transforms how we approach senior mental health. Instead of asking what has been lost, we begin to ask what the brain now needs. This shift reduces stigma and encourages proactive care. When seniors understand that their emotional struggles are rooted in biological change, not personal weakness, they are more likely to seek help and engage in healing. In this understanding, compassion replaces judgment, and science restores dignity to the aging mind. Depression and anxiety are often described as disorders of the mind, but this description is incomplete. In reality, they are conditions of the entire body, shaped by constant communication between the brain, the immune system, the hormones, and the organs that sustain daily life. This perspective is especially important in older adults, where physical and mental health are deeply intertwined. Emotional suffering in seniors cannot be understood or treated by focusing on thoughts alone. From a biological standpoint, the brain does not operate in isolation. It responds continuously to signals from the body. Chronic inflammation, which becomes more common with age, releases chemical messengers that influence brain function. These inflammatory signals can alter neurotransmitter activity, reducing the brain's ability to regulate mood and motivation. This is one reason why conditions such as arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes are often accompanied by depressive symptoms. The emotional experience is real, but its roots extend beyond psychology into physiology. Sleep offers another clear example of this connection. As people age, sleep patterns change. Deep, restorative sleep becomes shorter, and nighttime awakenings become more frequent. Sleep is not merely rest. It is a critical process during which the brain regulates emotions, clears metabolic waste, and resets stress responses. When sleep is disrupted, the brain's emotional balance becomes fragile. Anxiety intensifies, sadness lingers longer, and resilience weakens. What feels like an emotional problem may begin as a biological disruption in rest. The endocrine system also plays a significant role. Stress hormones, particularly cortisol, tend to remain elevated longer in older adults after stressful events. This prolonged exposure affects brain regions responsible for memory and emotional regulation. At the same time, age-related changes in hormones influence energy levels and mood stability. The result is a nervous system that is more reactive and slower to return to calm. Anxiety and depression emerge not from overthinking, but from a body that remains in a state of low-grade stress. Pain further illustrates the inseparable link between body and mind. Chronic pain continuously activates stress pathways in the nervous system. Over time, this constant signaling reshapes how the brain interprets sensation and emotion. Pain increases emotional sensitivity, while emotional distress intensifies the perception of pain. This feedback loop is common in seniors and often misunderstood. Treating emotional symptoms without addressing physical discomfort leaves the cycle intact. Understanding depression and anxiety as whole body conditions changes how we respond to them. It encourages integrated care that includes movement, sleep, nutrition, pain management, and emotional support. It also removes blame. Seniors are not dwelling on problems or losing control. Their bodies are signaling a need for balance. When care honors this biological reality, healing becomes more effective and more humane, restoring dignity to both mind and body. Nutrition, too, plays a quiet but significant role. The brain is metabolically demanding, relying on a steady supply of nutrients to maintain its complex signaling systems. Omega-3 fatty acids support neuronal membranes, antioxidants reduce oxidative stress, and stable blood sugar levels prevent mood swings driven by metabolic fluctuations. Eating well is not merely about physical health. It is a form of neurological care. It sends the message that the body is valued, worthy of nourishment, and capable of repair. Coping also involves learning to observe the mind with kindness rather than judgment. From a neuroscientific perspective, practices such as mindfulness and slow breathing activate the parasympathetic nervous system, shifting the body out of stress mode. They strengthen the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate emotional responses. From a philosophical perspective, they cultivate acceptance. Instead of fighting thoughts or emotions, seniors can learn to witness them as transient event signals rather than truths. This gentle distance can reduce the intensity of both depression and anxiety. It is important to acknowledge that coping does not mean eliminating all sadness or worry. Emotional pain is not a malfunction. It is a response to change. Aging involves loss, and grief is a natural companion to love and attachment. The goal is not emotional numbness but flexibility, the ability to move through emotions without becoming trapped by them. Science supports this view. Emotional regulation is not about suppressing feelings, but about allowing them to rise and fall without overwhelming the system. Professional support plays a vital role. When internal and social resources are not enough, therapy provides a structured environment where thoughts can be examined and medications, when used thoughtfully, can correct neurochemical imbalances that hinder recovery. These interventions are not signs of weakness. They are extensions of medical care, grounded in decades of research. The aging brain responds to treatment, often as effectively as younger brains. When given appropriate support, caregivers and family members are part of this biological and emotional ecosystem. Their presence influences stress hormones, emotional tone, and even immune function in seniors. Patience, listening, and consistency create a sense of predictability that calms the nervous system. From a scientific view, this stability reduces cognitive load. From a human view, it restores dignity. As we reflect on mental health in later life, we are invited to reconsider how society values aging. Emotional suffering in seniors is not inevitable, but neither is it a personal failure. It is the result of complex interactions between biology, environment, and experience. When we approach it with curiosity rather than judgment, compassion rather than dismissal, we create conditions where healing becomes possible. The aging mind holds stories, memories, and wisdom shaped by decades of living. Supporting its mental health is not about preserving youth, but about honoring continuity, helping the brain and body adapt gracefully to change. Depression and anxiety are not the end of this story. They are chapters that can be understood, addressed, and transformed. Through connection, movement, nourishment, reflection, and care, the nervous system can rediscover balance. And in that balance, many seniors find not only relief from suffering, but a renewed sense of meaning, presence, and quiet strength that comes from having lived and continuing to live fully. Human beings are biologically designed for connection and meaning. The nervous system develops, matures, and remains stable through interaction with people, routines, responsibilities, and shared goals. In later life, when these elements quietly fade, the brain does not simply adapt without consequence. It reacts. The loss of connection and purpose is not only an emotional experience, it is a neurological event that reshapes how the brain interprets the world from a scientific perspective. Social engagement activates reward circuits in the brain. When seniors engage in conversation, shared activity, or even simple companionship, neurotransmitters associated with pleasure and safety are released. These signals help regulate stress responses and stabilize mood. When social contact decreases, these pathways receive less stimulation. The brain, deprived of its expected input, begins to conserve emotional energy. This conservation can appear as withdrawal, apathy, or low mood, often mistaken for inevitable aging rather than a response to unmet biological needs. Purpose functions in a similar way. Throughout life, purpose provides structure. It organizes time, motivates movement, and gives the brain a reason to anticipate the future. Retirement, reduced physical ability, or changes in family roles can suddenly remove this organizing framework. The nervous system, accustomed to predictable demands, experiences uncertainty. Without clear signals of usefulness or contribution, motivation circuits weaken. Dopamine activity declines, not because the brain is failing, but because it is no longer receiving cues that effort will lead to reward. Loneliness intensifies this effect. Chronic loneliness activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The brain interprets isolation as a threat, increasing vigilance and stress hormone release. Over time, this state exhausts emotional resources, increasing vulnerability to both depression and anxiety. What appears to be sadness is often the nervous system's response to prolonged social deprivation. Reintroducing connection and purpose does not require dramatic change. Small, consistent interactions can reawaken dormant neural circuits. A routine phone call, shared meals, volunteer work, or mentoring others provide signals of belonging and relevance. These experiences remind the nervous system that it is still part of a living network. Understanding mental health through this lens shifts responsibility from the individual alone to the environment around them. Seniors do not lose emotional vitality because of age. They lose it when connection and meaning fade. Restoring these elements supports the nervous system at its most fundamental level, allowing emotional balance to return naturally, without force or judgment. One of the most persistent myths about the human brain is that its ability to change ends after a certain age. Science has steadily dismantled this belief. While the pace of change may slow, the capacity for adaptation known as neuroplasticity remains present throughout life. In older adults, this capacity becomes especially important, not as a tool for reinvention, but as a mechanism for restoration and balance. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to modify its structure and function in response to experience. Neurons form new connections, strengthen existing ones, and adjust signaling patterns based on what the body and environment repeatedly demand. In seniors, plasticity often shifts from rapid learning to gradual refinement. The brain becomes more selective, reinforcing pathways that are consistently used and allowing unused ones to weaken. This is not decline. It is efficiency shaped by decades of lived experience. Depression and anxiety can narrow neural activity, reinforcing circuits associated with fear, withdrawal, and negative prediction. Over time, the brain becomes accustomed to these patterns, not because they are true reflections of reality, but because they are repeated. Neuroplasticity explains why these states can feel persistent and why they can also be gently reshaped. When seniors engage in new routines, movement, learning, or social interaction, they introduce new patterns of stimulation. These experiences encourage the brain to form alternative pathways, gradually reducing the dominance of distress-driven circuits. Physical movement is one of the most powerful drivers of plasticity. Even light activity increases blood flow to the brain and stimulates the release of growth-supporting factors that protect neurons and promote connectivity. Learning new skills, whether intellectual or physical, challenges the brain to adapt, reinforcing cognitive flexibility. Social engagement adds emotional richness to this process, activating networks involved in empathy, memory, and reward. Importantly, neuroplastic change in later life is cumulative rather than immediate. The brain responds best to consistency. Small daily practices, walking at the same time, practicing gentle breathing, engaging in meaningful conversations, and repeated signals that guide neural adaptation. These signals do not demand effortful transformation. They invite the brain into stability. Recognizing ongoing neuroplasticity reframes senior mental health from inevitability to possibility. It emphasizes patience over pressure and support over correction. The aging brain is not locked into its current state. It remains responsive, capable of recalibration, and deserving of environments that nurture its enduring capacity to change. Emotional pain in later life is often misunderstood as something that should be hidden, endured, or silenced. Many seniors have lived through eras where emotional restraint was valued over expression, and vulnerability was mistaken for weakness. Yet both science and human experience suggest the opposite approach is needed. Healing does not occur by suppressing sadness, fear, or uncertainty. It occurs when these experiences are acknowledged, supported, and allowed to move through the nervous system without resistance. From a biological perspective, suppressing emotion increases physiological stress. When feelings are pushed aside, the brain does not forget them. It redirects them into the body. Stress hormones remain elevated, muscle tension persists, and emotional circuits remain activated without resolution. Over time, this state contributes to anxiety, depression, and physical illness. The nervous system seeks regulation, not silence. It needs signals of safety, understanding, and acceptance in order to return to balance. Support provides those signals. When a senior is listened to without judgment, the brain registers safety. This activates calming pathways that reduce stress hormone release and restore emotional regulation. Even brief moments of genuine connection can lower heart rate, ease muscle tension, and quiet intrusive thoughts. In this way, emotional support functions as a physiological intervention, not merely a comforting gesture. Professional care follows the same principle. Therapy does not aim to eliminate emotion, but to create a structured environment where thoughts and feelings can be explored safely. Medication, when appropriate, supports underlying neurochemical balance, giving the brain the stability it needs to process experience rather than remain overwhelmed. These tools do not replace personal strength, they support it. Much like glasses support vision or a walking aid supports balance, healing also requires environmental support. Predictable routines, respectful communication, and patience reduce cognitive and emotional strain. For seniors, knowing what to expect each day allows the nervous system to relax, This sense of predictability is deeply regulating, particularly when anxiety is present. Ultimately, healing in later life is relational. It unfolds through care, consistency, and compassion rather than force or denial. By replacing suppression with support, we honor the emotional reality of aging and allow the mind and body to recover their natural capacity for equilibrium, resilience, and quiet strength. As we grow older, the mind doesn't stop responding, it simply asks to be understood. Feelings of sadness, worry, or loneliness are not signs of weakness or failure. They are signals from a nervous system that has lived, adapted, and endured. With patience, connection, and the right support, emotional balance can return at any age. If this message brought you a moment of clarity or comfort, you're welcome to stay connected by liking this video or subscribing to the channel. It helps this conversation reach others who may need it too. Until next time, take care of your mind with the same kindness you offer your body.